back to In the Court of Winter King. Here we are again, episode 70. We're like a fine wine.
Every episode gets better and better and better.
Sort of, or not.
Yeah.
Christmas Day was great, because we went to Jimmy Spice's. The whole having Christmas dinner at home thing, why would you do that? And it's still a new thing to go out for dinner on Christmas Day. But I think it'll catch on. I think people will start to do it because, obviously expensive, but it's just brilliant. And if you go somewhere really nice.
The reason more people don't go is driving, because they want to have a drink. We didn't really do anything special for Christmas dinner. Roasted vegetables, basically.
Was that because everybody else had turkey?
No, it's because Mum couldn't be bothered.
I'm not surprised. I mean, I've done it. I've cooked Christmas dinner in the past. So what do we do?
We're starting our Radiohead run.
Yep, a run of Radiohead.
With the Bends.
The Bends.
Bends is the second album, that's kind of a curious place to start it.
It would be kind of obvious that we wouldn't do Pablo Honey. I'm sure people would have predicted that we weren't going to do Pablo Honey. Because where they started is not where they finished. And this is why doing Radiohead is interesting. Did they beat the system? In some ways they beat the system, but they started off as a band which sounded to me pretty dull. They had a big hit with Creep, and I remember them at the time. I remember thinking, no significance whatsoever. Strangely, my brother, who is not, he's not as musically enlightened as me, picked up on Creep, actually, and said, oh, there's great people in your band in there. And I just thought it was more boring indie rock stuff, incredibly dull. A lot of other people thought that was true as well. Amazingly, believe it or not, they at the time did get called Nirvana Light. That was actually the way people were describing them at the time, which is, if you just listen to Pablo Honey, not far off the mark, really. The only good thing about Pablo Honey for me is some of the vocals. So, but they were on a journey. And in 2 years, from 93 to 95, they did 2 albums and 3 EPs as well, with some material crossing over, but also a lot of other stuff as well. That's a lot, and they were touring a lot. Apparently, they were not a happy band, and it was suggested that they may be a splitting band, which is probably quite a common thing at the time. You think about it, all these sort of dreary commercial indie bands chasing success, and then sort of fading away after a couple of years, having really being kind of a one-hit wonder. Because I don't think Pablo Honey did all that well. Creep was, an MTV song. It was perfect for MTV at the time, and was played and played and played and played and played, and became their iron lung. Maybe out of that unhappiness came something else. Or maybe, all musicians do that. Maybe, that all these bands would want to do that. They want to change, they want to progress. They know their album, they did their album, it was a commercial album, it was a trendy thing, and then they want to move on. And for whatever reason, Radiohead did. And this album is interesting because they are moving on. And the 3 albums we're going to do are that journey. So that in itself is fascinating. Oh,
really interesting stuff.
I do remember around the sort of time when Radiohead were huge, that they're still huge, but a lot of people were saying, well, actually, the Bends is probably better than OK Computer. And OK Computer people call
Paranoid Android.
But yeah, people often call it Paranoid Android by mistake. But I think at one point there was a bit of a consensus. People started to say, well, actually, this isn't as good as we thought, because Paranoid Android is the sort of standout track, whereas this is the better album. And I remember thinking that myself. But I haven't listened to this album in 15 years, and that's not the case. I don't think that's the case now. Brilliant stuff on here, but in lots of ways it is very much of its time. And I think what really exemplifies that is that straight away, I think the thing about Radiohead is that they're great at the packaging. It's not particularly the cover, and I think they really went into the CD age. They got the gist of it, in that it's not just about the cover anymore, because it's only little. It's about the whole inside, all the pictures inside, and all that. And Radiohead is so good at that. And there's a bit of that in here, which is great. You've got all their own drawings and all that stuff, which is great. But actually, the bit that the record company want them to see is this god-awful picture, this 90s posing douchebag picture of them all wearing shades with sort of warped images of them looking unhappy and very po-faced, because they're very serious. And you look at that image and you think, oh, for God's sake. And that personifies that era. I wonder what they think of that image now, I don't know.
I bet they hate it. It's hard to say what they think about it, because they're very much a one-man figurehead band. Apart from Tom York and Johnny Greenwood,
yeah,
they're almost sort of like a black hole behind them. Obviously, these are the school friends, aren't they?
Yeah,
they started a band in school, so they're obviously very, very close to each other. They very much put the Tom York take on things. I have no idea if that is representative of the band. Himself, he's almost a sort of conspiracy theorist.
that kind of stuff.
Take on things. I think this is a fantastic run because we really do see a marked change, and this is the era of Radiohead I think about when I think Radiohead. Actually, most of their, from Kid A onwards, there is sort of a familiarity to their albums, which has gone on probably more albums than these, but this is the sound I remember and think about with fondness. Radiohead, it is very dour stuff, but that sells, you know. I mean, Roger Waters made a pretty good career out of
being depressing,
and it sells well.
Here they're going into that though, aren't they? They're finding their voice, or Tom York is finding his voice. There was apparently there was some disagreement between Tom York himself and the rest of the band. There was a thing there, and maybe it's about Tom York finding his voice and taking up a bigger share of the whole thing.
Now, I was unaware of Creep until after I'd sort of listened to OK Computer, the charts at that point, or MTV. I actually think it is a brilliant song. I really like Creep. There is a sort of, it is their best pop song in the sense that they've only really done one pop album. Now they're very much more pop experimental, would you say?
Sort of, maybe. I think they're a rock band. I think whatever pop there was ended with this album. There's still a poppiness there.
I don't know. It's still, I don't know if they're trying to have broad appeal, but they do get it, and I think it's a hangover from. Well, I suspect it's a hangover from this period. If the later albums were released first, I don't think they would be as big as they are now.
No, they wouldn't. Absolutely, and that's nothing to do with the quality of the music. That's because they're kind of snuck in a way. It feels like they played the game and then changed, but I don't think that's true. I think they just grew up and stopped being boring, trendy, fashionista teenagers. And this is the transitional album, and that's still there, but there's also something really, really special there as well. And that's probably why the Benz is popular, because it straddles those two things quite well.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe in a way, Radiohead came to the same conclusion that rock music had already done, but because maybe they weren't aware of that, maybe because of record company pressure to not even think about going there, or maybe their own conscious decision not to go there, that they ended up coming to the same conclusion, if you like, independently. And that's why they're so good. Doesn't mean their music is the same as whatever from the 70s. It means that there's a principle in that is the same as prog, what I would call prog. And that's why people call them prog. They don't sound anything like Yes at all. And if they did, they would never have got anywhere.
I wouldn't call them prog.
I wouldn't call this album prog. I think they became prog.
Are they prog? See, the thing about prog is there's a sort of part of the process is doing things differently.
Yeah.
So looking for new and interesting instrumentalisation or arrangements, or doing something that's kind of against the grain, almost deliberately so, and still coming up with appealing music. I don't know if that's what Radiohead are trying to do. I think they have a different sound, but I think that's more boredom than anything else. With the process of guitar music, I mean, you see some of the old videos with Tom York with the guitar in his hand in front of the stage. You think, what the hell's going on? I don't think they're deliberately trying to go against the grain, although they are a very anti-establishment band. I think that's more of a political thing than a musical thing. So I would call them experimental, which is why I said they're a sort of experimental pop ahead of more than prog.
I mean the whole prog moniker doesn't really mean a lot. I mean, obviously people who like prog tend to label things prog. Whatever I like is prog because I like it. Therefore, it's prog.
I mean, it's a prog.
But yeah, I mean, we don't really know. We're not experts, and I get the impression no one completely knows because the band are a bit obtuse about it. But I get the impression they very quickly got bored with their own music and realised how shallow it all was. The whole MTV machine going around them. Because remember, this is the 90s. When there's so much money involved. Everything's so corporate, and the industry is moving towards the stage where everything that's new in the chart is effectively manufactured in-house with a fictional backstory of the band and all that stuff. And none of those bands are actually homegrown bands who've played the pubs and all that. At this stage, they were still trying to pick up the next big talent, and you had coked up studio execs who were paranoid. And remember, by this point, it wasn't the bands that were on drugs; it was the suits who were on drugs, panicking and trying to figure out what the next good thing was, and had kind of forgotten what good was. What's good and what's bad, and what's gonna sell and what isn't gonna sell. And it was a horrible time, really. I remember that it felt like everything was now corporate, and this was this kind of music, not even this kind of music, really Pablo Honey kind of music. That was it now. That was all we were going to get. And of course it passed because the industry fell over. Alternative music, which obviously isn't alternative at all, became just one niche. The same as prog is one niche, literally now, or rockabilly is because the record companies no longer control the flow of music.
Little interesting experiment. I was looking at what was in the charts last month.
Oh, last month, this year?
Yeah. 22nd of November I was looking at. And it was literally owned by a couple of, I think Sam Smith had about six singles in the top 20 chart.
I don't even know who that is.
I've only recently learned.
6 singles in the chart. But that's like sold about 20 copies to get to number 20.
Well, that's, yeah.
And 100 copies to get number 10. And 1,000 copies to get to number 1.
I'm pretty sure, I mean, I'm not 100% au fait, but I'm pretty sure if you went through it and sort of jotted down which artists have been on X Factor, it'd be the majority.
Yeah, it's now, it has to be like that because it's a sort of self-contained machine now that is now irrelevant in the sense that because they don't sell enough, they've just got to keep the turnover going. There's no reason to gamble on a new band that they saw in the pub and thought, oh, they're good. You just manufacture your own and make sure it fits that particular thing. And that was a long process, but obviously the 90s was the peak, and the 90s was where there was a lot of money. You know, I get the impression Radiohead were part of that. Almost immediately didn't like being part of that. So their song about being unhappy about not being part of it. I mean, you could say that they're prog in the sense that they just do what they want. Oh yeah, but that whole era, and listening to this, even looking at that, and particularly looking at that, makes me think of Game On, the sitcom from the 90s, which I think was really good actually.
It was.
I worry that it's not as good as we remember it, but it was brilliant at the time. It was really funny, but it had very indie music, and stylistically you could tell that's where it was coming from, and that time, it's very much of its time. So all that stuff makes me think of that for whatever reason. But yeah, anyway, we're talking about this trio of specials, the specialness trio of specialisms. So the bends, the record company had it remixed. So what we hear there wasn't the band's take on that album actually. The record company actually had it remixed by someone else to make it sound differently. I mean, it did take them a long time to make, and they were really struggling, and they were really sort of worried it's just not good enough, or the music they were making wasn't good enough, and they did really trying to make it better. So that might be one of the reasons why it sounds so much of its time. Maybe if their own mix would be very different. Maybe. Mm-hmm. And another band that I really liked at the time was Portishead. The first time I heard them was on a silly programme about aliens, which was obviously a response to the X-Files, so there's lots of programmes on TV about aliens, and the music on that was actually from this band Portishead, and I thought it was brilliant music. And there was a lot of hope in that direction about, you know, on the one hand, rock music is, forget it, you know, rubbish. But there was stuff happening with that kind of thing, with dance music, there was going to be amazing music. There wasn't yet. But then a couple of years later, Portishead released another album, and it was exactly the same as the other album. So it was like, oh, is that it? Okay. And you realise it's just sort of stylised. So that was disappointing. Well, whereas this for me was a dead end. I definitely heard the bends at the time, and I thought, actually, this is good. Particularly one song, which we'll talk about in a bit. But I didn't really get it until Paranoid Android, actually, like a lot of people. But my impression was this was still coke-fueled studio executive music and a bit boring. And I was wrong, because it isn't boring. It is worth mentioning that the songs are all much the same length. I mean, there's not much variation from 4 minutes. Whether that's an intentional band thing or whether that's a producer has been told. That's the optimal length. It has to be correct length. You have to do this and stand like this when you hold the guitar. And is it good?
It is good, yeah.
It's a good album. And the first song is...
Planet Telex.
Planet Telex. Originally called Planet Xerox, and they couldn't use it because it was a copyrighted name. That's strange. I'm not sure that would happen there. I don't know.
If they'd realised that this was going to be on one of Radiohead's big album or main album historically, I would have thought Xerox would have been.
Yeah, but at the time it wasn't realised what a big deal they would become. Kind of with this album, it's not an outstanding starter. It's okay. It's immediately of its time. I think immediately it makes me think of Game On. The production is stupid and annoying. Whether that was the remixed version or the original was like that as well, I don't know. But it could have been worse. I mean, there's flowing keyboardy stuff in there, which certainly wouldn't have been on the first album. The first album would have been kind of noisy rubbish. I really like the bit when it changes to major, and that's the point when his voice goes up. Da, 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 da. It hooks you in. You start to realise this is actually a bit better than that.
Track 2.
Okay, track 2. The Bends. Very, very 90s. This song. Oh no, shine. The guitar is annoying. Whether that's me or whether that's them being sort of fashionista idiots, I suspect a bit of both, to be honest. And it makes me think of the Manics and Game On and Top of the Pops in the 90s. Well, they've got a new person in now. They're cool now. Every year. And then one year, on Top of the Pops, they actually made all the bands play live, even the pop groups play live. It was horrible, except for Julian Lennon, who actually had quite a good song there, believe it or not. It was actually an okay song.
Track 3, High and Dry.
High and Dry, absolute classic, just a great song. And suddenly it all feels different. This just feels completely different to those first two songs for me. I don't know if that just does for a lot of people. It sounds like Zip. It's like a Led Zeppelin 3 kind of thing, and that particularly that little guitar riff, the little acoustic guitar riff, is wonderful, and maybe Paul Simon-y kind of thing, and amazingly anti-indie, and that it's a good song. It's a real, and it turns out it was recorded for Pablo Honey, but they decided it wasn't down with the kids enough at the time of Pablo Honey. So coming back, of course, they realised this is just a fantastic song. Doesn't matter if it doesn't sound down with the kids. Really famous song. Got to number 17. Because it was the first single, I suppose, so they were still gathering momentum from the album. I think the album would have gained the momentum to make the single sell. It's good enough where people would have bought the album and then thought, I'm going to buy the single as well for the B-sides because this is really good. If you bought Pablo Honey, you would have bought the single. And in fact, a lot of people would have just bought the Creep single and not bought Pablo Honey, which I think is what happened. Fake Plastic Trees. Another acoustic-y thing that builds a building song. Not as good as High and Dry, but it's a good song. It's just a good song. It's all about the sound of his voice. That is their strength. Even when they weren't recording good songs, he's just got that voice, and he always had that voice right from the start. It did develop, obviously, when they must have realised what it was and how to make the best of it. But at the same time, pointless electric guitar noises doesn't need to be there.
Just a quick question, Kev. What's with a beard?
Beards are cool. Didn't you know? 2015, beards are cool again.
Beards are cool.
They were uncool last year, but this year, very cool.
So you're growing a beard because beards are cool?
Because beards are cool, yeah.
Track 5, Bones.
Bones.
What, Bones?
Right, Bones. No Klingons. Never laugh.
No Klingons.
If you want to know what that is, Google Cockney Star Trek, it's great. Stupid Cod Nirvana riff. You could write a million of those. Trendy nonsense. Probably that's my least favourite track on the album.
Track 6, Nice Dream. In brackets.
Back to the cool acoustic stuff. Yeah, I was trying to figure out whether it was square brackets or rounded brackets. Or would they even count? But to me, that was important, and I think it's rounded brackets. Because it's a weird font. It's difficult to say, but I think rounded brackets. On iTunes and Media Player, it comes up as without brackets. So, tell us what you think about the brackets. Much better use of guitar. It still goes noisy, but you can see that he's finding his way about how to use the sound, that amazing sound of electric guitar, rather than this idea that electric guitars should be played exactly the same as an acoustic guitar. I've always been amazed how people don't realise that just sounds awful. If you strum an electric guitar with full overdrive, it just sounds foul. Why would you do it? Get an acoustic guitar and play the acoustic if you were to do that. Never understood that. The solo is really noisy and lots of attack, but it's good. Track 7, press 7. Just. What's fascinating about this one, it's kind of got everything in it, in that it starts with an annoying obvious Nirvana 90s riff, but then it does a whole load of different things. And when his voice comes in, by the time his voice comes in, you're completely won over. You got that ascending thing, which is great. And not just the song, but at the end, the way he uses the guitar at the end is fantastic. Particularly when he gets right to the top, and the way he uses the feedback, it's just perfect. It doesn't get any better than that. That's some great use of electric guitar from someone who, in a way, does so little with his guitar. There's so little detail in what he's doing, but there it's just perfect. Doesn't get any better. Brilliant.
Track 8, My Iron Lung.
My Iron Lung. This is the song about Creep, which he calls My Iron Lung, because it was like a millstone around his neck, an albatross. Really annoying guitar effect at the start. Maybe that was novel at the time, but it does sound like someone's been playing with their effects and got this stupid sound. But again, that doesn't matter because it's just a great song. All about the vocals.
Track 9, Bulletproof. I Wish I Was.
Bit of a filler, kind of bit average, but again, the use of the keyboards and the sound of his voice make it work brilliantly.
Track 10, Black Star.
A very famous track. Starts with a nice little classical thing, and then goes into a sort of repeating bass motif. And there's some really nice guitar all over it. I mean, obviously it's one of the things that's going to alienate a lot of people. All that electric guitar, all that obvious electric guitar is going to annoy people. But it's not really that Black Star, sorry, I'm joking. Haha. It fades in an annoying indie way, and then they fade the song in. Don't like that. The melody's brilliant though. Got a great melody, so who can...
It's actually the melodies they sacrificed later on.
That's true, actually,
they don't really do melody.
Yeah, and the way they use his voice is different. because obviously it's all about the texture of his voice rather than the notes. So he's just making noises with his voice, so that's different. So that is a shame.
Track 11.
Sulk. Really good song, very well presented. The sort of penultimate song on albums are often a hidden filler, aren't they? But I don't think this is at all. I think this is a great song. A little bit Beatlesy, maybe. I don't know if people at home will be going, how dope. It gets louder, but doesn't go anywhere, it just repeats, which is a little bit disappointing. But none of that matters.
Track 12.
Because of track 12. Street Spirit Fade Out. You know what's really weird? I didn't know what this song was called.
Really?
Yeah, isn't that weird? Obviously I know it. We're not worthy. As I sat down to think about what I was going to say in this review, I kind of realised there's nothing to say about this. Because it almost doesn't fit on the album. Because this is a transitional song to the next album. You could put this on OK Computer. You could even put this on Kid A. And it is fantastic use of sound and of. It's not ambient at all, but it's a texture, isn't it? Of the voice and the guitar and whatever all washing in together. Obviously, the sound of his voice is central. Inspired by the music, he said the music was inspired by REM, and of course you read that initially and you think, what, REM? But I see where he's coming from. They make kind of sad stuff.
It's like distilled REM.
But it's like what REM can't do. Maybe that's what REM are trying to do, instilling the human condition in song, the sadness, the sorrow of song. I think it's really influential, but I don't think anything has really done that again. It's one of those things, isn't it, where there's only really one of those. I suppose things it's influenced. It's like, you know the music they're playing 28 Days Later? That kind of thing, which is very filmy and very atmospheric and that kind of thing. It is interesting who did Radiohead influence? What is there that Radiohead influenced, other than actual prog bands, like Steve Wilson or something? Who have they influenced? What is there? Snow Patrol.
Muse are often quoted in the same breath as Radiohead.
They're much more
bombastic.
Yeah, but also homogenised as well. In that all their songs sound much the same. They have a sound.
They definitely do have a sound, but I think that's probably down because it's. Well, I don't know too much about it, but I assumed it was one guy who was really talent behind Muse. So obviously you get.
And it's a great voice again. Yeah. Well,
yeah. And the guy's a pianist, so.
So yeah, a brilliant album. I don't know whether to give it 4 or 5 eggs. Really, I'll leave it there. I think
it's difficult. 4 or 5 eggs. It's definitely not 6. I'd have to give it 4, I think. But it's a strong 4.
If you took the half, 50% of the best songs on there.
Yeah. Consider the time as well.
If you, look at the albums that I've got from there. It's a bizarre time. It is a strange time.
Oh dear, I'm not happy giving that 4 eggs.
Should we say 4.5 eggs?
Yeah, let's say 4.5 eggs.
Yeah.
4 eggs and an egg yolk.
Yeah, just the yolk.
Yeah, so you've made a meringue or something like that. You've got a yolk left.
Yeah. So anyway, thanks for watching once again in 2015. Insert joke about Back to the Future 2 here. We've got a little competition, haven't we?
Yeah.
To make things a bit more interesting, we think we're flagging a bit with our videos. They've gone a bit. So we thought it would be interesting to have a little competition. Question is, what's this? What is that? Can you identify what that is? You need to say specifically what it is. If you say a computer, that's not specific enough. You need to be much more specific than that. I need the actual model, specific model.
I think we need to hear the keyboard action. That may help. The prize is...
You can choose a one-off video for us to do of any album. That's the prize. For the person that can identify this
first,
give us one album we have to do as a one-off. Which should be funny, hopefully, or entertaining, or interesting.
Yeah.
It's up to you. Thanks very much for watching. See you next time.
Bye-bye.